And round and round and round we go. It's not so much a stuck record, it's like a record played at the wrong speed is what it feels like at the moment. And frankly, it's about time we change direction. I'm going to vote against this today because I think it's a pretty... the Minister looks depressed and upset, like I've let him down terribly. But the truth is, this is a ludicrous attempt at a body swerve by the government. This House decided in this parliamentary session what was the proper process for proceeding. First of all, a meaningful vote on the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration all in one. That's what this House decided and enacted in this session. And secondly, that there should then be an Act of Parliament to implement it. Now, I feel that what the government actually intends to do is to use the Withdrawal Agreement Implementation Bill to repeal Section 13 of the Withdrawal Act. And yet we've already made that decision about what the proper process is in this session of Parliament. So I don't think that they will be able to do so, which is why today doesn't provide more certainty, as the Attorney General argued, if we pass the motion tonight. It provides more uncertainty because we will still have to go through the process of a full, meaningful vote. The Prime Minister, up until this moment, has always agreed with me on this point. Her manifesto expressly says that the political declaration and the Withdrawal Act must be taken together. Her manifesto says it, and she's always preaching to us about manifestos, so I'm preaching back to her. She also said repeatedly, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And I agree with the Right Honourable Member for Stone that we should never be separating out the divorce settlement and the custody of the children. The whole thing has to go together. That is an intrinsic fundamental principle. Now, there may be good reasons for voting for this motion, and I fully accept that many ministers, I accept that ministers adopt them. But it worries me that so many have said that they absolutely loathe this deal, but are nonetheless intending to support it today. Those are not good reasons. The European Research Group said of the agreement, we will become a vassal state, many of whose laws will have been created abroad and over which we have no influence. How could they possibly vote for us? This is a constitutional crisis. We need a settlement that will last for generations. There is a deep, deep wound in the body politic, and a sticking plaster really won't suffice. We need to stitch the nation back together, and we can only do that if we proceed in good order. No more parliamentary shenanigans, no more partisan jiggery-pokery and behind-stairs work, no more subjugating the national interest to private ambition. Mrs. Anne Main.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. They say in life there's over two certainties, death and taxes. Well, I'd like to add one more to the list. The certainty is that this House is a Remainer House. This House will resist kicking and screaming every opportunity to try and take this country legally out of the European Union. And I have listened to every speech in this House today, so I'm pleased to be called. And I've made a note of some of the comments that have been made. And the Honourable Member for Loch Skye and Loch Arbour said the voice of Remain will be heard. We must stop Brexit. We will never accept Brexit. I have to say, those sort of comments, and I've heard other versions of them today, have changed the context for people like myself who voted against the withdrawal deal on both occasions. I find it deeply undemocratic that the method put in place by the Honourable Member for West Dorset suggests that we are having a voting pattern, which we've already had one of, where we are expected to vote in a half-an-hour slot on 8 or more options that we have not debated or tested in this House, that we have not had any legal information in this House, that we have not had the Attorney General's view on this House, that we have not run past the European Union to see if it's acceptable to them. And yet we're supposed to say that this is a democracy and that this actually is going to deliver a consensus. What it will deliver is a bogus consensus, because what will happen, particularly if this happens on Monday, that may end up becoming preferential votes, I don't know, could be it's an amendable motion. Yeah. What we will have is, despite having 2 years of debate about this particular withdrawal agreement and examined its flaws in minutiae, and there are many, what we will have is the potential to go to something far, far worse. So the context of this has changed for myself, and I know for some other honourable members. This is a very, very difficult decision for many colleagues. Yeah. But I know the siren voices from opposite, and there have been plenty of them, I have had 608 emails, as many do, on this topic alone, and I have had most of those emails, all but 80, are from the Remain side of the argument, because they see that this withdrawal agreement, with all its flaws, is the one way that they can stop Brexit. So today, I am changing my vote because I am not being cowed into going down a process that on Monday means I'm expected to make a choice over somebody else's selection of what they think Brexit should mean. That I'm not going to choose on behalf of my constituents and the country as a whole based on something that's had no debate, no scrutiny, and because a Remainer Parliament is hoping against hope that this deal, which is the best of the ugliest of sisters, that this deal will be struck out today in the fervent hope that they can bring something far softer or not at all. And for all those saying about a second referendum, I hope they can explain to the British people how by the time they get one on the doorstep, it's current.
This is the third time that we have considered this issue. The government says this is not meaningful vote 3. And they will not count it as meaningful vote 3 if they lose today, but they would certainly count it as meaningful vote 3 if they won today. Now, a number of MPs today, honourable members, right honourable members, have said that they have changed their mind between vote 1, vote 2 and vote 3. And there will be many people in the country asking themselves, why is it that MPs can vote 3 and maybe 4 times and are entitled to change their minds, but it would be the greatest democratic calamity of all, according to the Prime Minister, to give the public one vote on this deal and give them the right to change their minds. And two things are different about how we're doing this today. The first is the separation of the political declaration from the withdrawal agreement. And the second is the starting gun being fired on a Tory leadership contest. The political declaration was already vague, but separating it out from the withdrawal agreement makes this the most blindfold Brexit. And we are being asked to vote to leave with no idea at all of what the future relationship between the UK and the EU will be. And no attempt to answer the fundamental question that Brexit poses. Do we want a more distant economic relationship where, in all likelihood, Northern Ireland will have to be treated differently from the rest of the UK? Or do we want a close economic relationship where we continue to obey the EU's rules, yet give ourselves no say over them? That question must be answered. And now, we are being asked to give all of this, to mortgage all of this, to the outcome of a Tory leadership contest, where the battle will be between candidates trying to prove that they are the truest believer of all. Mirror, mirror on the wall will be the question. Who's the most right-wing nationalist of them all? That is what the candidates will be asking. Now, if the Prime Minister wins tonight, I would contend that the battering ram approach to parliamentary democracy will still not bring the country together. This has not been good enough as a process. And if she loses, she will have a decision to make. This House had made clear its opposition to no deal, so the Prime Minister will have to decide on the future, a longer extension and a recasting of the process if this goes down tonight.
Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, I was rather hoping tonight to be able to crack open some champagne and celebrate the United Kingdom leaving the European Union. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, I'm more likely to be reaching out for the antidepressants as a consequence, because we're not leaving the European Union, and that's because Brexit has been treated as a problem and choreographed by people who do not have their heart in it rather than an opportunity to be grasped. My vote on this issue has always been to implement Brexit, and it will continue to be so. We need to restore the sovereignty that we've lost to the European Union over the last 40 years. And that's why I voted against extending Article 50. I voted to keep no deal on the table, and I voted twice against this deal, which has so many fundamental flaws in it. We've all witnessed, Mr. Speaker, how this House has voted to take over control of the order paper. We've seen how it's wanted to extend Article 50 and to rule out no deal, and to consider a customs union and even no Brexit. And I believe that we will witness it implement the softest of soft Brexits, if at all, if this deal falls today. There are some who believe that if this deal falls, that no deal can somehow happen, that the European Union will, instead of accepting £1 billion a month off of us, will refuse to accept an extension of Article 50. I simply cannot see that happening at all. On the contrary, I believe if we vote against the government today, the European Union will extend Article 50 for a lengthy period of time. So we have a choice, Mr. Speaker, today, to accept this deal and all of its faults, or to risk losing Brexit completely. There is no certainty in either direction today. It is a balance of risk, as has often been said on both sides of the House. But I fear, and my greatest fear, is that we lose Brexit entirely if we vote this down today. And that's exactly what could happen. I agree with many of the criticisms that have been levelled against this deal, the impact that it will have on Northern Ireland and the lack of ability for the UK to leave unilaterally. My decision to vote for this is in some ways harder than the decision I took to resign from the Whip's office. But circumstances have changed. I have not. We are now between a rock and a hard place. It is an an unenviable situation that we find ourselves in, and we should not have been put in this position. It is this deal today, or we submit ourselves to a customs union and the potential of losing Brexit forever. I believe passionately that Britain's best place is outside of the European Union, and that's what I'll be voting with the government.
Vernon Coker.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On reflection, and having sat here listening to the debate this morning and then this afternoon, what a catastrophic strategic failure of leadership we've seen from the government to reach this position. A position where, as Parliament, we remain divided, and we remain divided as a country. And I was extremely disappointed that the reaction to the indicative votes that took place the other day, instead of the government responding to that and looking at that and saying, does that offer us a way forward? Is there a way of bringing those together which would actually command a majority of this House and command a majority of the country? Instead of that, we got the government crowing from their front bench that no particular option had got a majority. That is no way to bring the country together. That is no way to bring the Parliament of this country together. And I say to the government, even at this late stage, they should be seeking to look to see what would command a majority in this House and what would actually command a majority in the country. But instead of that, what do we get? We get a motion today which this House is asked to pass, and I'll be voting against it with many of my colleagues, asked to pass, which sets aside Section 13 of the EU Withdrawal Act. It sets aside the British law. It sets aside the law of this country, which says the withdrawal agreement will be passed with the political declaration and will be passed with the consent of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Let me say this to the Minister and to the government. I think the British public will be astonished that the government, in order to push through its withdrawal agreements, even though it's been defeated twice, has come up with a ruse which allows it to say we will separate out the political declaration and we will set aside for our purposes the British law. They will not understand it, and frankly, neither do I. Let me say this as well. The political declaration, the people of this country should know that if the Withdrawal Act is passed today, there is no certainty about what that means for the political declaration. No certainty about single market, no certainty about customs union, no certainty about many of the other things that matter to the people of this country. As I said at the beginning, it is a catastrophic failure of leadership by the government and a continuing failure by the government to seek to bring Parliament together and this country together.
Free Clifton Brown.
Speaker, I'm very grateful to catch your eye in this important debate. I'm sure my constituents will have noted my assiduousness, having been here for over 4 hours to speak for 3 minutes. An improvement on last time, it was 2 minutes after 4 hours. Mr. Speaker, I had hoped, listening to this debate today, this historic debate, that we might see honourable members and right honourable members in this House honouring their manifestos at the last election to actually honour the result of the referendum to leave the European Union. But actually, having listened to the debate today, it sounds as though that's going to be unlikely. And therefore, we're likely to move to indicative votes on Monday, where I suspect the common consensus emerging is that there may well be some form of a customs union. Just, my honourable member, leave it for a minute. Many members of this House believe that this may be a way out of this whole conundrum. I have to tell the House, Mr. Speaker, it most certainly is not, because it will not eliminate the needs for customs checks. There will still be a need to be checks on plants, animals, regulations and standards. The UK would be similar to Turkey, and we would need movement certificates for all goods that are going to be exported to the EU.
I'm grateful to an honourable friend like me. He was here during the Maastricht debates. And isn't there a political judgment to make today that if we do not vote for the withdrawal agreement, we may never leave the European Union at all?
My honourable friend reads my mind, and I'm going to come on to precisely that subject in a minute. But above all, the EU will require checks at the Northern Irish border. So I say to my good friends in the DUP, a customs union certainly will not solve the Northern Ireland problem. Crucially, if the customs union is accompanied by closer alignment, for example with Common Market 2 or EEA or EFTA or Norway Plus, this means that we would have to honour EU competition laws, laws on state aids and customs legislation. Well, this means that the Labour Party's policies on nationalisation will be illegal under EU law, so they will be facing two ways at the same time. If we vote for this withdrawal agreement today, we can come to full trade agreements with high-growth countries in the rest of the world, none of which, sadly, are in the European Union. Coming to my honourable friend's point, the alternative, I believe, to not voting for this withdrawal agreement today, and all it does, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is take us to the next stage, to the withdrawal and implication bill, which can be fully scrutinised by this House, it can be fully amended, the problems that my honourable friend for Stone has outlined about not leaving the European Communities Act, all of these things can be rectified in that bill. But if we don't get as far as that bill, we will go back to the indicative process. So coming to my honourable friend's point, I believe the alternative is to risk a long delay in Article 50 after April the 12th. This means, crucially, we will fight European elections. Fighting European elections almost 3 years after the British people voted to leave the European Union. And then my prediction is that we will finally go for a long extension of Article 50, during which time everybody will say we must revoke it. Our trust with the British people will then be broken.
That's right.
Democracy and faith in this Parliament will be severely damaged.
Right.
I urge all colleagues to vote for this agreement today.
Mr. Speaker, Britain can leave the European Union in one of two ways. We could choose to reject EU regulation altogether. The downside would be severe damage to our economy, highlighted by Honda's Swindon plant closure, cancellation of Nissan models in Sunderland. Recent votes, I think, show the House rightly recognises that danger of no deal and isn't willing to go down that road. The alternative is to protect the economy, stay close to Europe, but the problem with that is having to apply EU rules, but no longer having any say over what the rules are. That is the Brexit choice. Move away from the EU, take the economic hit, or stay close, reduce the economic hit, but have no say over the rules. Now, Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons we're in the problem we're in today is we do not know the Prime Minister's choice. We don't know which of those two she favours. The political declaration was supposed to tell us, but it doesn't. Even if we did know the Prime Minister's choice, she's stepping down, so someone else will have to make it. But I do understand the Prime Minister's unwillingness to choose. Both options have severe downsides. That's why many of us opposed leaving the EU in the first place. But how can we sign off the deal without having some idea of where we're going to end up? All we do know is the Prime Minister's choice for the transition period, that is, for that initial period to stay close. We'll gain control over migration from the EU, but we will lose our influence over rules we'll have to adhere to on data privacy, on financial services, on product standards in a whole host of areas. Some, I think, worried about migration from the EU may think that is a reasonable exchange. I cannot see that it is. One example, Mr. Speaker, to illustrate the problem. We've conscientiously implemented GDPR data privacy rules. The UK played a key role in drawing them up. The Prime Minister rightly recognises we're going to have to continue to follow them so we can carry on exchanging data easily with the EU. So she announced she wanted to keep our place on the European Data Protection Board, which oversees GDPR. But she couldn't achieve that in her negotiation. Under the withdrawal agreement, we'll lose our place on the day we leave the EU. We'll no longer have any say on the rules, but we will still have to comply with them. And writ large, that is the position we'll find ourselves in across the board. Mr. Speaker, we do need a longer extension. We need a consensus-building process which is going to take time, and I urge the House to reject the deal today.
Sir Mike Penning.
Much, Mr. Speaker, and I've sat through the debates this afternoon. I'm not going to take any interventions because I want colleagues to get in as well. We need to talk about trust. The British public are fed up with Brexit, and they're fed up with us. The vast majority of us in this chamber stood on a manifesto to honour the referendum result. I respect those that didn't, but the majority of us did. But this House, whether we like it to admit it or not, is a Remain House.
Absolutely.
The Labour Party would like to bring this government down, and they quite clearly see this as an opportunity to do that. That's an opposition's job. I can understand that. We was in opposition for long enough. But what is fundamentally wrong is standing on a manifesto to say you honour the referendum result and then do every single thing you can in this House to delay, change, make it soft, do whatever other language we want to use to do that. And I'm not going to give way. I've already said I'm not going to give way, and I'm not going to give way so there's others. We can build the trust again in the British public, but we can only do that if we compromise, not compromising like the Scottish National Party we were talking about earlier on, which is we don't leave, not saying we want to be in a union, not saying, yet again I'm so popular, Mr. Speaker, but actually I'm pleased the Prime Minister's here because this is fundamental. If there are people that are in the leadership campaigns and want to replace the Prime Minister, for God's sake, put that in the back burner till we get this through. We are not voting this evening on the bill. What we're doing is voting to get onto the bill so we can have the amendments, we can have those changes that so many colleagues are considering, including my friends from Northern Ireland. Colleagues stood on a piece of paper that said, I will honour it. They will have to go back to their constituencies and say, I have honoured the referendum result as I promised you. I will have to go back and say that I've compromised because I don't like the agreement. Most of us don't like the agreement. But it's a damn sight better than sticking two fingers up to the British public and say we can ignore you. And that basically is what is happening for MPs in this House whose constituents voted to leave, not with caveats, not with bits and bobs, leave or stay, and leave is what we should do, but I am petrified that this House is going to block the will of the British people, which is why I will support the amendment to the motion this evening.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has run down the clock in an attempt to blackmail MPs at every turn. This government is in chaos. The country is in chaos, and the responsibility for this chaos is the government's and the government's alone. The Prime Minister pulled the meaningful vote in December because she knew it would fail. And since then, in more than 3 months, nothing has changed. Not one single word in the 600 pages of the withdrawal agreement, not one single word in the 26 pages of the political declaration has changed. Today, Mr. Speaker, the government is trying to bounce this House into voting for a damaging deal that we have twice rejected. But as ever, the Prime Minister refuses to listen. Today's vote, third time lucky, the Prime Minister hopes, is an affront to democracy and an affront to this country. Separating the withdrawal agreement from the future relationship when the Prime Minister told us the two were indivisible. This is what she said to the House on the 14th of January, and I quote, "The link between the political declaration and the withdrawal agreement means that the commitments of one cannot be banked without the commitments of the other." Today, the Prime Minister is asking us to take a punt on the withdrawal agreement and hope the best for a political declaration. It's not good enough. The two are linked. And nothing, Mr. Speaker, demonstrates that linkage more than the backstop. The reality is, the political declaration is incredibly vague, and there are, in it, I quote, "a spectrum of possible outcomes. Nothing is even close to being resolved." That makes it even more likely that the UK would fall into the backstop, which creates regulatory divergence between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, as the Honourable Member for East Antrim said. And we know, Mr. Speaker, it endures indefinitely thanks to this Parliament prizing the Attorney General's legal advice out of a very reluctant government. Labour will not vote for a blindfold Brexit, and passing the withdrawal agreement today without the political declaration would be to do just that. The Prime Minister said at the end of November, when she signed off the deal, "We won't agree the leaving part, the withdrawal agreement, until we get what we want in the future, because these two go together." And as the Honourable Member, my friend the Honourable Member for Edinburgh South, said in his speech, it would be selling the House without knowing where we're moving to. Although, unlike me, I'm really not sure he's old enough to have watched Monty Python. Finally, yes.
Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful indeed to the Leader of the Opposition for allowing me to intervene in him. The Leader of the Opposition should be enormously proud of the achievement of the Labour Party in the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. And therefore, I am extremely upset and very disappointed that the Labour Party today will vote against the Prime Minister's Brexit deal, which protects the Good Friday Agreement and the consent principle.
Mr. Speaker, we are very proud on this side of the House of the Good Friday Agreement and the peace that's been achieved in Northern Ireland as a result of it. And there's nobody on this side of the House in the Labour Party that wants to do anything to undermine the Good Friday Agreement and the great achievement that it was. The Shadow Solicitor General said Article 184 of the withdrawal agreement commits the government to negotiate expeditiously on the terms of the political declaration. That would be a deal based on a very wide range of potential outcomes for the country, and who would decide which direction we go in? Because now that the Prime Minister has announced her own departure, we do not know if we'll be getting the future chosen by the Honourable Member for Uxbridge, or the Honourable Member for North East Somerset, or maybe even our jobbing Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for West Dorset. The Labour Party will not play roulette with this country's future, especially when the roulette wheel is rigged by the Conservative Party. Labour respects the results of the referendum. We reiterated that in our manifesto and again in our party conference last year. But this Prime Minister's approach to Brexit has been nothing short of a shambles. The choices facing our country post-Brexit have been decided solely by what is in the interest of the Conservative Party, not what is in the interest of this country. The Prime Minister announced her red lines and went to negotiate without any consultation with this House, without any attempt to build consensus. Those red lines were opposed by the representative bodies of workers, businesses and industry, who are now, Mr. Speaker, tearing their hair out in exasperation at the incompetence of this government and the uncertainty they face. The first Brexit Secretary said he would get a deal that would deliver the exact same benefits as now. The current Brexit Secretary obviously felt that's far too good for the country, because only 2 weeks ago he went in the lobbies to back no deal and to oppose an extension. That would leave the UK crashing out in just 10 days' time with no preparations and chaos at our ports and airports, leading to a crisis in factories, shops and hospitals. And what did the government's forecast say about the Brexit Secretary's preferred no-deal option? That would make the economy not 4% worse off, but nearly 10% worse off. So it's no wonder then that, faced with a choice between the Prime Minister's bad deal and a disastrous no deal, the House, this House, has given a clear no to both repeatedly. The government suffered the largest defeat of any in parliamentary history in January. The Prime Minister said then, and I quote, "It's clear this House does not support this deal." So what's the government's response? It's tried begging, it's tried bullying, it's tried bribery, and it's still defeated by the fourth largest majority in parliamentary history. The Prime Minister told us we must leave on the 29th of March and even wrote that into primary legislation. Then she herself voted against leaving on the 29th of March. So the Prime Minister then went to Brussels to negotiate an extension and almost unbelievably even turned that into another negotiating failure. This government's Brexit negotiations have been a litany of failure, culminating in today with a Prime Minister who's been forced to announce her own departure, only tabling half the deal she has negotiated. This really is a half-baked Brexit. When she became Prime Minister 2.5 years ago, she said it was her mission to deliver Brexit. She has failed. She also stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised that her government would tackle burning injustices. Since then, she's failed every test. Homelessness is up, life expectancy is falling, infant mortality is rising, crime is rising, police numbers have fallen, and this year's NHS has had its worst ever month on history. People waiting longer in A&E for an operation and to start cancer treatment. And just yesterday, we learned that more children are in poverty and the scourge of pensioner poverty is rising again. The job of government is to make people's lives better, and this government has failed. A botched and half-baked Brexit deal like the one before us today would compound that failure. On Wednesday, the House sought to find an alternative, a new negotiating deal for the government. Labour's plan, and I believe, provides the best compromise for a deeply divided country and, in truth, a deeply divided House. It is backed in large part by major organisations in industry and business and by trade unions. It's based around the certainty of a permanent customs union, close alignment with the single market and a dynamic alignment on rights and protections. Mr. Speaker, Labour urged support for 4 of the options tabled by members of different parties on different sides of the House. We did so not because we'd be equally happy with each of those outcomes, because we recognise that we have to compromise to get this resolved. The whole House knows that the current uncertainty is damaging businesses, is reducing investment and is costing jobs now and in the future. and the stress of people in work is palpable as you travel around the country and talk to people in all parts of the country. So I hope on Monday the House retakes control, that parties and members on all sides will enter into those debates and votes in the spirit of trying to find an acceptable compromise. We need to get a better deal. The country deserves a better deal, and I'm convinced that a better deal can be negotiated. And if members decide, the chance for people to have a final say. If we cannot do that on Monday, then I ultimately, and many others would agree with me, say no alternative other than having a general election to decide who rules this country in the future. Mr. Speaker, to enable the Prime Minister to have sufficient time to answer the debate, I say this in conclusion. I urge members today to act in the best interests of their constituents and to vote down this unacceptable deal. There are many people who fear for their jobs, fear for their industry, or whether they or their friends have a future in this country, and that is causing immense stress to many people. However they voted in the referendum in 2016, they are united in their stress and concern about their future and their community's future. We need to rebuild our country and invest in our communities, too many of which have been neglected, ignored and underfunded for years. A botched and half-baked Brexit deal like the one before us today and would only deepen those problems and those divisions. Mr. Speaker, this deal, even the half of it we have before us today, is bad for our democracy, bad for our economy and bad for this country, and I urge the House not to be cajoled on this third time lucky strategy and vote it down today.
Prime Minister!
Mr. Speaker, this has been another impassioned debate on Brexit. I've stood here on many occasions over the past few months, answering questions and taking interventions from right honourable and honourable members. What I want to do in the minutes remaining is out the serious choice that faces us. Today should have been the day that the United Kingdom left the European Union. That we are not leaving today is a matter of deep personal regret to me. But I remain committed to the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, and that is why I brought this motion to the House today. There are those who will say the House has rejected every option so far. You'll probably lose, so why bother? I bother because this is the last opportunity to guarantee Brexit. And I say to all those who campaigned to leave, who voted to leave, who represent constituencies that voted to leave, indeed all of us who want to deliver on the vote to leave, if we do not vote for this motion today, people will ask, why did you not vote for Brexit? By voting for this motion today, we can send a message to the public and to the European Union that Britain stands by its word and that we will leave the European Union on the 22nd of May. And this is the reason.
I was listening very carefully to her message to all those who have voted to leave in the course of the past few years. What has she possibly said to the 48% actually voted to remain?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that the deal that we have agreed, the arrangements and the proposals that we have put forward absolutely apply to the 48% who voted remain, because they recognise the necessary balance between delivering on the result of the referendum while doing that in a way that protects jobs, protects livelihoods and protects people's security. Mr. Speaker, last week the EU Council agreed that Article 50 could be extended to the 22nd of May if the House approves the withdrawal agreement this week. That would give us enough time to take the withdrawal agreement bill through Parliament. We would not have to hold European parliamentary elections, and we would leave the European Union. But they also agreed that if we did not approve the withdrawal agreement by tonight, the extension would only be to the 12th of April, not long enough to ratify a deal. So anyone who wants to leave with a deal would have to support seeking a further extension. Any such extension would probably be a long one, and that would certainly mean holding European elections. So approving the withdrawal agreement today avoids a cliff edge in 2 weeks' time. It avoids European elections. It avoids a long extension which would at least delay and could destroy Brexit. But, Mr. Speaker, to secure this extension, to give us a firm exit date, we do not need to agree the whole deal today, just the withdrawal agreement.
Yes, exactly.
I believe there's an overwhelming majority in this House for the withdrawal agreement. 3/4 of Conservative MPs backed it in the last meaningful vote. And opposition MPs I've spoken to tell me their problem is not with the withdrawal agreement, it's with the political declaration. So I want to address the central argument put forward by the Leader of the Opposition again this afternoon, that voting for the motion will enable a blind Brexit. It will not, and for 3 reasons. First, if you want to leave with a deal, then whatever future relationship you want, it needs to sit alongside this withdrawal agreement. The withdrawal agreement is fixed. It is part of any deal. Second, agreeing this motion today is not ratifying the whole deal. That will only happen once the withdrawal agreement bill has passed through all of its stages in this House and the other place and has received royal assent. What this motion today does is give us the time we need to pass the necessary legislation and complete the current debate which the House is considering about our future relationship. Now, the government stands by the current political declaration, but we're not asking the House to approve it today. Nor does today's vote prejudge or preempt the outcome of the process run by my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset. In fact, for those options being considered, approval of this withdrawal agreement is a prerequisite. And third, in the next phase of negotiations, we've committed to give Parliament a significant and ongoing role in the process. Mr. Speaker, if you had selected the amendment in the name of the honourable member for Stoke-on-Trent Central and others, the government would have accepted it. And if this motion carries today, we will bring forward a withdrawal agreement bill that will include commitments to implement that amendment, and we'll discuss the specific drafting of that with those who supported the amendment. So by voting for this motion, members are not closing any doors. They will still have the ability, through the withdrawal agreement bill, to influence that future relationship. Today's motion is not about a blind Brexit. It is about a guaranteed Brexit. Today, we can give the public and businesses the certainty. Today, we can give the public and businesses the certainty they need. Today, we can show we stand by our word. Today, we can show that we can come together in the national interest. Today,
not too much noise in the chamber. The Prime Minister is addressing the House and must be heard. The Prime Minister.
Today, we can show we can come together in the national interest. Today, we can take a step forward together. This is a difficult day for members right across the House. I'm asking members to take a hard decision, and I know that. I'm asking some honourable members.
In her heart of hearts, won't she accept that this Brexit will make Britain poorer, weaker, more divided and more isolated. And the door she should not shut is the door of democracy. She should allow the people to have the final say if they want this shambles, because the Leavers in my area certainly don't.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say to the honourable gentleman, as I've said to the House before, if he looks at the economic analysis and he looks at the different types of Brexit that could take place, he will see that the deal that delivers on the result of the referendum and has the best economic outcome for this country is the deal the government has put forward. Mr. Speaker, as I said, I know that this is a difficult day for members right across the House. I'm asking them to take a hard decision, and I know that. I'm asking some honourable members to vote for a Brexit that is less than they hoped for, and that's not easy. I'm asking other honourable members on the opposition benches to help me deliver on the instruction of the British people, and that's not easy either. There are good Labour members opposite who are as determined as I am to deliver the Brexit that their constituents voted for. As willing as I am to make a compromise in order to move our country forward. And at this historic moment for our country, it is right to put aside self and party, right to accept It is right to accept the responsibility given to us by the British people. And that is what I have done, Mr. Speaker. I have... That is what I have done, Mr. Speaker. I have said I am prepared to leave this job earlier than I intended. I have...
Order! Our proceedings are being widely watched. Please let's treat each other with respect. The Prime Minister is winding up the debate and must be heard. The Prime Minister.
I have said that I am prepared to leave this job earlier than I intended to secure the right outcome for our country. And when the division bell rings in a few moments' time, every one of us will have to look into our hearts and decide what is best for our constituents and our country. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way, and she's right to say that she has sacrificed her own position to try and get her deal through.
Shame.
But does she appreciate that in doing so, she is asking us to place our trust in who will follow her? And looking at the likely candidates, I've got to say sincerely to her, she may have sacrificed her career to put the country first, but there are plenty of people who aim to follow her who've always put themselves first above the country.
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman, the numbers in this House will not change. The numbers across this House will be the same. The desire of this House to be able to have a greater role in the future will not change. I've made the commitment that I have in relation to the legislation in the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, in relation to the amendment from the honourable member for Stoke-on-Trent Central. This, in the next stage, it will be important that there is a greater involvement of Parliament to be able to ensure that as we move forward together, we get that right result for our country. But this is about our country. It is about our national interest. As I say, everybody will have to... I'll give way one last time. I'll give way to the honourable lady.
Thank the Prime Minister for giving way. The Prime Minister said this is about the country. But with respect, Prime Minister, that is not how it's seen. Brexit, withdrawal agreement, referendum has always been about the Conservative Party and its
This House across all parties voted for a referendum. This House across all parties voted to trigger Article 50. sorry. I'm so sorry. I forget, of course, that the Scottish National Party always have a different view on this because they want to stay in the EU, they want to stay in the Common Agricultural Policy, they want to stay in the Common Fisheries Policy. No good for Scottish fishermen and Scottish farmers. I had said I would give one last time, but as I've just referenced the SNP, I would give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Well, it's some way to build compromise, Mr Speaker, but why did she never come forward to the Scottish Government and the Scottish National Party, offer wide sweeping reforms and devolution for employment law on welfare, for example, in order to give Scotland the power it needs to protect itself from the measures in her deal that it doesn't like? Instead, she stuck her head in the sand, and that's why she's got nowhere with the Scottish Government or the Scottish National Party.
To the Honourable Gentleman, the Government has given the Scottish Government extra powers and they're not using them. Except, of course, the power to increase taxes in Scotland for the United Kingdom. So I say to members this: if you want to deliver Brexit, this is the moment. If you're passionate about making sure that the United Kingdom leaves the European Union, back this motion. If you care about our union and want a deal that protects it, back the motion. If you want to honour the referendum but want Parliament to shape our future relationship, back this motion. It's the right thing for our country, it's the right thing for our constituents, and with all my heart I commend this motion to the House.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye! Of the contrary, no. No! Division! Clear the lobby! Order. The question is as on the order paper. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Andrew Stevenson and Craig Whittaker. Tellers for the noes, Thangham Debonair and Nick Dakin.
Shut the doors!
Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 286. The noes to the left, 344.
The ayes to the right, 286. The noes to the left, 344. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock! Point of order, the Prime Minister.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think it should be a matter of profound regret to every member of this House that once again we have been unable to support leaving the European Union in an orderly fashion. The implications of the House's decision are grave. The legal default now is that the United Kingdom is due to leave the European Union on the 12th of April, in just 14 days' time. That is not enough time to agree, legislate for and ratify a deal, and yet the House has been clear it will not permit leaving without a deal. And so we will have to agree an alternative way forward. The European Union has been clear that any further extension will need to have a clear purpose and will need to be agreed unanimously by the heads of the other 27 member states ahead of the 12th of April. It is almost certain to involve the United Kingdom being required to hold European parliamentary elections. On Monday, this House will continue the process to see if there is a stable majority for a particular alternative version of our future relationship with the EU. Of course, all of the options will require the withdrawal agreement. Mr. Speaker, I fear we are reaching the limits of this process in this House. This House has rejected no deal. It has rejected no Brexit. On Wednesday, it rejected all the variations of the deal on the table. And today, it has rejected approving the withdrawal agreement alone and continuing a process on the future. This government will continue to press the case for the orderly Brexit that the result of the referendum demands.
Point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker, this is now the third time the Prime Minister's deal has been rejected. When he was defeated the first time, the Prime Minister said it's clear this House does not support the deal. Does she now finally accept that the House does not support the deal? Because she seemed to indicate just now that she's going to return to this issue again. On Monday, this House has the chance, and I say to all members, Mr. Speaker, the responsibility to find a majority for a better deal for all the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, the House has been clear. This deal now has to change. There has to be an alternative found. And if the Prime Minister can't accept that, then she must go, not at an indeterminate date in the future, but now, so that we can decide the future of this country through a general election.
Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We should all be aware.
Order, the right honourable gentleman must be heard. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We should all be aware of the responsibilities that we all have in this House, the seriousness of the situation that we are in. And I would say respectfully to the Prime Minister, she now has to accept that her deal has been defeated 3 times. And I applaud the members of Parliament on all sides that voted against the government's proposition. It is a bad deal, and we have to find a way out of the crisis that we are in. All of our constituents would expect that. We must give ourselves time, and I suggest to the Prime Minister we now must look seriously at the option of revocation. We need to apply the handbrake to this process. And quite simply, Mr. Speaker,
You've messed it up.
The Prime Minister has failed to take this deal forward. She does not have the confidence of the House. The Prime Minister has indicated her departure. She should now go, and we should be having a general election.
Thank you. Yes, I'll come to the honourable lady. Point of order, Sir Vincent Cable.
On Monday, it is perfectly possible that the House may indicate a preference for one of the options such as a customs union or a confirmatory vote, which are, of course, compatible with the withdrawal agreement. If that is the case, is the Prime Minister then open to listening to the view of the House and considering how we might have a longer extension to explore them?
I think the question was perhaps to some degree a rhetorical inquiry. The Right Honourable Gentleman has made his point, but further debate on these important matters will follow next week, and we'll leave it there. Point of order, Heidi Allen.
The Prime Minister must now seriously recognise this deal is over. And this House has a responsibility, a serious responsibility on Monday to find a solution to this impasse. There are jobs and livelihoods right across this country at stake now. The way out of this impasse, as many of us have been saying for months and months and months, we must have a people's vote now.
Point of order. Yes, I will come to the Honourable Lady first because I saw her first. Point of order, Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, it does beg a belief that the Prime Minister still seems to not recognise a dead deal when there's one right in front of her. It has now been defeated 3 times, and that is in spite of the procedural games that have been played. And does she realise just how grotesque it looked when, frankly, she was looking as if she was willing to sell out the country's future for the price of some Tory MP careers in replacement for it? The idea that it was somehow sensible for MPs on the other side to say that they would suddenly change their minds about a deal they'd been against for months because they thought they might have some career advantage from it. That is wrong, and it is contemptuous of this country.
But there is a degree of latitude on these occasions, but the Honourable Lady has stretched it excessively. If she wanted to speak in the debate, she might well have caught my eye, but she didn't seek to do so. Point of order, Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Speaker, could I urge the Prime Minister now to look seriously at what the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Esher and Walton, said earlier in the course of the debate about the backstop issue? She knows that remains the problem. She knows that Michel Barnier and Leo Varadkar this week have said that in a no-deal scenario there will be no hard border. Please, Prime Minister, even now, as the Right Honourable Gentleman said earlier, use the time constructively to get that matter sorted out.
Thank you. Order. I invite the whip on duty to move the agenda.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. And then the other going to say aye. The contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.